So, guys, I was on Instagram and I was looking at this story, and when I was going through Instagram, and it's about this father who had his son save $5, and then what happens was that at the end of the week he bought this kid ice cream. And the kid spent that $5 on ice cream. The kid dropped the ice cream cone, and he put a post on online about like not buying his kid a new ice cream cone, even when the store offered to give him another one. The kid looked very, very upset. And there's some people who were talking about this, and some people were just saying, you know what, the father's in the wrong for this. And there's a couple of arguments. Like, I think that, on the side of the father, he's trying to teach his kid two things. The father is a CEO, so he's trying to teach this kid about business. You work hard to earn rewards, such as saving money for a treat. And then also the other thing is that because the kid accidentally dropped the ice cream, either intentional or unintentional, he's teaching his kid that, okay, that's just how life works. If you buy something and you accidentally dropped it, you're not going to get it back, really. And it's almost like, like, for example, I invest in trips, and I know, like, I went to AEW. I was gonna go to AEW Blood and Guts, but my Delta Airlines flight was late, 16 hours. So I'm happy that I bought insurance for that. If I didn't buy insurance for that, Delta Airline would not accommodate me, and I would have had lost $200 on that. And it taught me a hard lesson. That I was lucky to buy insurance, but there are gonna be times when I travel and I don't buy insurance, and then something happens and I'm not able to go, and I can just be mad at Delta Airlines, or I can actually be like, okay, I need to kind of cover myself, be more responsible, really. So I think that that's the lesson he's trying to teach his son, and I think that it is a mix of a lesson. I think that as somebody who's definitely done this channel and talked about the harshness and emotional abuse and other things that I dealt with as a kid, I would have to put some insights. I think that the overall lesson that you were primarily teaching his kid is, I think he's trying to teach his kid a couple lessons. I think the first thing is to save money, and I think the second thing is that when you're not, even if you make a mistake, you're not going to get your reward back. Like, what's done is done, really. You go fishing, you catch a blue lobster, you're not watching it goes back into the ocean. Then that's what happens, really. But the thing, then you got to get it again, really. Or I remember, like, one time I worked at a job that was that had a lot of issues, really. And I remember, like, one time somebody bought a lottery ticket and they won $50,000. Like, I stepped out of line. It could have been me. But I also remember, I said to myself, hypothetically, what would have happened if I told my boss, okay, I have a $50,000 lottery ticket, and he did something like say, okay, let me hold on to it, let me put it in the safe, and he never gave it back to me. And, and it teaches me not to trust people. Like, there are parents that like to teach their kids some very, very hard lessons. And sometimes, we have to tell ourselves that sometimes, what's the outcome. And I think with this, it may teach the kid, a couple of things. I mean, it may teach the kid that, I know he's trying to teach the kid. He's trying to teach the kid to be responsible with his ice cream, but because you got to be responsible with your belongings, and that's hopefully the lesson that the kid's going to get out of this. And I also think the other lesson is that people want to give him a free ice cream cone. He said no, the kid's not going to have it, and I think that the lesson of also that is to teach the kid that people are not always going to bail you out when you lose something. So I think that that's really good. I just think that that's a lesson trying to teach this kid. But there's things that could happen. Like, sometimes kids get an opposite lesson. I remember when I was a kid, one time my father, like, I had a bunch of baptism money. Like, we had like a few $100s. My dad said, like, okay, you guys can buy something. You and your brother can buy something with that. And then my dad changed his mind and says, no, I'm putting it in a savings account because two teenagers can't be having a few $100s. And I remember getting mad because my father did that. And I also got mad because there were times when my dad would ask my older brother for laundry quarters and never pay him back. A man making $100,000 a year asking a 14-year-old for quarters and never paying him back and saying, the family needs money. So I remember, like, one time just stealing from my parents because I said, like, I'm sick and tired of this, cheap bastard penny pitching thing. And I learned the lesson the hard way as an adult, which is, that that the lesson is that sometimes life is unfair when you're a kid. Sometimes your parents have really deep standards when it comes to saving money, and you can't just steal because you don't get your way, really. I learned that as an adult, but at that time, I felt that my parents were cheap bastards. And I also remember, like, when my dad found out, he said something like, you know, where I come from, we break your fucking hands for stealing money, really. And as I said, there'd be people who say that's good parenting, but like, yeah, to put that kid in the place. And then there's other people that say, like, okay, you know, that's threatening violence, you know, against a person. But, you know, you can look at this kid. He could be like, okay, well, to hell with it. You know, maybe the next time he has like $5 or $10, he doesn't tell his, and his dad forgets about it. He'll take that money, buy like an extra school lunch, or maybe he'll go through life just, you know, just not saving money, because he'll be like, okay, well, I remember that time when I had money and my father wanted to teach me a tough lesson, really. So sometimes there are people who derail and learn different lessons. And also, I think that maybe it is controversial, because I think that some people may say that's unrealistic expectation for a 5-year-old. You know, unrealistic expectation for a 5-year-old, and that's kind of like a little too harsh. But I think that there's a couple of things. I think, like, you really have to see the nature of the child. I think in my situation, I would look at the child and I would say something like, if the child was really a spoiled brat and this was like, you know, a thing that happened, and definitely I think that the kid needs to learn life is unfair, I would definitely teach him that. But if I feel like it's a situation where the kid's always working hard, the kid's always well behaved, well, you want to teach him an extra lesson and then this happens, I would give him a one chance with this, because I think that with what I believe is that I want to see a pattern of reformed behavior before I actually give an extra punishment, or I give an extra, like, you know, leeway. Like, I think like a good example is that I had a younger brother, and I remember like he was 8 or 9 years old, and what happened was a couple of things. I remember one time going home for a college break, and what happened was that my dad gave my little brother an allowance, and what happened was that my brother would sometimes walk the dog, sometimes he wouldn't, and he would argue. And I remember like one time, you know, my dad asked me to walk the dog because my younger brother just would put up a fight about it, and I just ignored my father, because I was in my head saying, you know, like, well, fuck you, you know, you're gonna boss around a 22-year-old, but you're not gonna boss around a, you know, a 9-year-old. So my dad intimidated me, and he looked like he wanted to throw shit, and then I did it because, you know, I just didn't want to argue back. The next time, I remember during the Thanksgiving break, my father intimidated me into coming home overnight on Thanksgiving, saying, no, you got to think of your younger brother. He misses you. And in response to that, whenever, like, you know, when I moved in with my brother, after I graduated college, for like 8 or 9 years, I didn't talk to my younger brother. I didn't talk to my dad. And one of the reasons why I did that was because of what the message was. My parents were trying to teach me, it's not about me. When you're when you're in my house, you know, even if you're in your 20s, you will be my son. You will obey the rules of this house. And sometimes the rules are unfair. It's like Chris Rock with the dishes. Tanya and his other brother doesn't do the dishes, but they're going to put it on him because he's the older, more compliant one. Same thing with walking the dog. And then also the other thing too is that, as I said, you know, he can't tell a 7-year-old, 9-year-old kid, even though you miss your brother's an adult, he makes his own choices. You do not boss around an adult. You do not get your way. And that's why I left, because I was like, you know what, well, fuck him. You know, well, fuck my younger brother and fuck my father, because you do not teach me, you do not send that message of, I'm an adult, you used to smack me, you used to scream and yell and intimidate and throw furniture to get your way with me, you know, disciplinary wise. But whenever your younger brother is sad and crying, whenever Jordan was sad and crying and never wanted his way, you always lean to it, because I think in the end of the day, you wanted to die knowing that at least one of your sons actually was always there for you, instead of just, you know, instead of your two other ones. And then also, me and my older brother had mental health issues, so he's going to say, oh, well, Matt and Byron don't visit him because they're both autistic, but my younger brother, he understands family, and their brains don't understand it. So it's a little bit of a cop-out for him to actually acknowledged that he was a very harsh parent. He was a very double standard parent. And he also kind of had the mentality, and he was also raised this way of, you know what, if the older person had it harder, they have to be humble for the younger one. And that's not good. So I think in my situation, it's comparable in the sense that when you teach a kid that the world's unfair, that there's tough consequences, sometimes it teaches a bit of a byproduct. And I think with this kid, I think that I do hope that his dad has a conversation with him and says, the reason why I didn't buy you an ice cream cone because I wanted to teach you to be responsible with your stuff. The other thing I want to teach you is that in this world, there are a lot of times where kids are spoiled brats to get their way all the time. And then there are also times too where people will say, okay, you dropped your ice cream cone, you're cute, you get another one. That's not how the real world works. What would happen if, you want to get a job and it's the best job for you, but what happens is you oversleep? Do you think that manager is going to say, okay, we're going to actually schedule another interview and give you a fair chance as somebody who showed up on time? Yes, that happens, but most of the times that doesn't. So I think that that's kind of what he's trying to teach his kid, that the world doesn't bend to you. And I think that that's a good message. And that's an important message because, we live in generation accommodation, but I do think that there needs to be additional conversations with this child. And I think that that's what the father really has to teach him and say, okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to try it again next week. And we're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to be responsible this time. And that's what I would teach. I would say, okay, you screwed up one time, we're going to do it again next week and you're going to learn to do it. And then that's that really. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. It just means that I want to teach you to be more careful with your stuff, really. Maybe ask for ice cream in a cup next time. But I think that overall, the message has to be teach this kid to be responsible with the things that he buys. If accidents happen, you don't always get something back because of an accident. And I do think that what I've suggested is a good disciplinary action, which is saying, okay, well, you're going to do it again. You're going to be careful this time. You're going to come back, and that's the way to get it. And you're going to be careful next time. And then that's how I feel about it. But I think that that's the best way to teach the lesson. I think that just walking away and saying, okay, well, life's a bitch, and then you die, that's not the best lesson to teach the kid or not give him another chance at this, So that's all I got to say, really. And just like, from the things that I've learned, I think that life is unfair is an important lesson to learn. That there are times when you screw the pooch and you can't get your opportunity back. And then the other thing for the father to understand, and I hope he also understands, is that you also have to kind of have to teach a kid, and I think this is a good lesson, is that sometimes when you make a mistake, you got to work a little bit harder to get what you want again. So maybe not I think next week would be good, but he can also say something like maybe in 2 weeks. We'll do the same thing, type of thing, really, just to teach you that you got to work a little bit harder, and that's that, really. So I do think that there has to be a follow-up message for the child, for him to learn something. But I think with my examples, I've kind of just said, in my situations, there were no follow-ups. There was no discussion of, okay, the other thing too, if you come home, you have to bend by my rules, or you have to be considerate of your younger brother. It really came off to me when I was a kid of, it has to, like as I said with Chris Rock, it's easy to put it's taking advantage. And I think that's the thing that I got from my parents. It's not really considerate of others, it's taking advantage. And then, I'm 30 years old, and I'm almost 40 years old, and I don't have a family because I don't want that responsibility. And then I also just was sick and tired of having a screaming spoiled brat as a younger brother and always bending to his whim, or when he's screaming like a maniac and everything like that. I've kind of said, like, the only thing that I ever learned is what my father taught me, which is don't have kids. So sometimes, as I said, that you can teach your kid a message and it could be a little too harsh, and they can learn other messages that they shouldn't be learning. or you can also unmotivate a kid, really, So just be careful with how you teach your kids. But I do think a follow-up lesson of him, like maybe doing the same type of earning the $5 and then getting an ice cream cone maybe in 1 week or another 2 weeks would be appropriate. But but definitely have a conversation with your child about being responsible with what they buy, and then also that that the being responsible with what they buy, and that you can't always get things back, or you have to work a little bit harder to get the things that you want. I really, really think that then that's the lesson to teach the kid. So, so that's all important.